Welcome back, everyone. In this series of videos, we're going to be talking about the sculpting tools. These are the tools you use to shape your landscape, to create hills and valleys and all that kind of stuff. Now, before we do that, I want to create a brand new map here because when I created this level, this map 01, I came under File, New Level, and I use this time of day template, and I've noticed by playing between videos here that my frame rate is rather low. This is a largely untested level for me, and I don't know how performant it is. However, this default level, which I want to choose instead, I know that my frame rate is pretty high when I use this, and I want to make nice quality videos for you all, so I'm going to choose this one to demonstrate some sculpting. Okay, here we are inside of a new level. I'm going to select our floor mesh here, just nuke that out. And I'm going to create a brand new landscape coming under our landscape tab. Manage tab is the one right underneath it. This is where we can create a brand new one. Make sure create new is selected. Enable edit layers is checked. Make sure that that is checked. Material, I'm using ground grass as a placeholder. We're going to swap that out later. Section size 63 by 63. My sections per component I swap to 2 by 2. Let's go ahead and create this. And when I do, you're going to immediately notice a few things. One thing you will notice is that there are dark lines everywhere. Oh my, what are we to do about these dark lines? These dark lines are outlining our different landscape components, and I failed to mention in our question and answer section what to do if you see these dark lines. Well, these dark lines will be gone if you build your lighting. So if you come under build right here, and you build lighting only, it will make them disappear. However, as you go about sculpting and painting your landscape, they will reappear. So they're constantly out here. I recommend only building lighting when you're really happy with your landscape, and then it'll make all those dark lines disappear. Don't be obsessive about trying to get rid of them. Okay, now let's talk about our sculpting tool. Here we are under landscape. Now we're not in the Manage tab anymore, we're in the Sculpt tab. And along the left-hand side, here are our different sculpting tools. The most basic being the Sculpt tool. And what you see currently in your viewport is a spotlight of sorts with two circles. Over in our settings over here, our brush size is 2048. That represents the outer circle, the outer ring. I can change the size of my brush. Bigger numbers equal bigger brush. Smaller numbers equals smaller brush. If I left click, I will create some blobs. I will raise the terrain. I'm just holding down the left mouse button right now. And this is how you can quickly sculpt your landscape. Now you'll notice that I'm just raising it right now. And it's raising it based on my brush size there. If I wanted to increase the size of my brush, I'll raise more terrain. However, if I wanted to lower the terrain, all I would need to do is hold down the Shift key and left click. And that is how you can create some valleys quickly. Now, you'll notice that with all of my slopes and my different valleys here, that it's not a steep drop off, it's a gradual drop off or a gradual rise. What's determining that? Well, this brush fall off parameter is what's determining that. Let me turn the camera around a little bit and we'll do a quick demonstration this way. I'll reset my brush size. So if I just left click with these settings, you can see I've got a fairly gradual slope, and you can see if I place my brush right over it that it is a gradual slope from my outer ring to my inner ring. That inner ring that is determining my brush fall off size. Now, if I set this to a value of like 0.1, this is going to create a very drastic brush fall off. So now if I was to left click, you'll see that there's a very little room for that gradual sloping. There I'm trying to place my brush immediately over the top of it. Now if I set my brush fall off to a value of say 1, I've essentially got a dot in the middle of my brush size, and if I left click from here, you can see how gradual that slope is from the outer ring to the midpoint. So that is how you can determine how drastic your hills and valleys are. Let me set this back to its default value. Tool strength, this will determine how quickly you sculpt either up or down. So if I was to set this to a value of 1 and left click, the terrain will rise rather gradually. Control Z will undo your last stroke. Control Y will bring that back. Let me do Control Z one more time. If I was to set this to 0.1 and I would hold down left click, it's going to rise rather gradually. So this is just kind of a way to determine how quickly your terrain is going to rise or fall. Now this use target value is currently disabled. We could turn it on, but I believe it does nothing. Someone can correct me on this, but through all my research, it looks like this was a legacy parameter for those that were sculpting a landscape using a Wacom tablet. I am using mouse and keyboard, so it should not apply to us. Now, let's talk about this clay brush. What is this used for? Well, I haven't found many great uses for this, but I'm going to find the best use case that I can figure out. I'm going to hold down kind of a washed out background here. Might have to adjust some of the lighting here. If I hold down the shift key and left click to create a little trench here of sorts. Now, if you change your mind and we're like, hey, I want to fill that back in. If you left click within it, it's not going to fill it in super uber accurately. You can get some of these kind of weird ridges in there. So I'm just going to do Control plus a Z to undo it. Whereas if you click Use Clay Brush, and now I try to left click and scrub right down the middle, it fills that in rather nicely. Okay? With all that out of the way, let's now talk about our edit layers. When we created our landscape, we made sure that we had Enable Edit Layers checked on. This is a new feature. And currently, we've been doing all of our sculpting on this base layer. That's why it's highlighted in yellow. There's this alpha value associated with it. And what this determines is how much, percentage-wise, we see our sculpting. So look at my mountains here. A value of 1 means we are seeing it 100% what we sculpted it as. If I set this to be 0.5, these mountains are going to be half as tall. 0.5, there you go. And you saw my valley in the background there kind of fill in a little bit as well. If I set this to 0 and hit enter, you'll see essentially I'm returning back to flat terrain. There we go. Now I can also set this to a negative value. So if I set this to -1, what you're going to see is your hills have now become valleys, and what was your valleys have now become hills. All right, I'm going to set this back to 1. Now I'm going to create another layer here, and let me just find a new swath of landscape to play upon. And we'll come over in this section over here. And we can create more layers here by right-clicking and saying create a new layer. And I will rename this layer. We can right click and rename it as layer 02. Now currently I have this layer selected, but let me just select my base layer here. And I am going to quickly sculpt a little bit of a mountain. And the idea is I want to create kind of a volcano of sorts. Raise, 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 raise. Kind of a terrible looking mountain, but you kind of get the idea. Okay. Okay, so I've raised some terrain in my base layer here. Now, I'm going to jump to layer 02 now. I'm working in layer 2, and I'm going to shrink down my brush size here a little bit. And now I'm going to hold down the shift key and left click and create a little hole in it, as if I was to create a volcano of sorts. Okay? Now, we can show and hide our different layers to see what our terrain would look like with or without our second layer. Now remember, I did our sculpting of this little hole here on layer number 2. So if I was to hide that, I could see what that mountain would look like without that hole in it. So this is a good way, adding more layers and editing separate layers to see what something looks like with or without a given effect. Now notice too that I'm toggling my layers visibility. So currently I've got layer 2 off. That was the one with the hole in it. And with this layer selected, when it's highlighted in yellow, I cannot sculpt on the layer. It's got to be visible in order for me to actually sculpt on it. I've also got these lock layers right here. If I lock this layer, I'll receive a little message here letting me know that this layer is locked and I must unlock it before you can work on it. So that's a way to prevent you from screwing yourself up there. Now note that I can also right click on this layer 02 here, and I can say I want to clear all the sculpting on this layer. So that'll essentially get rid of it. It'll ask me if I want to, and I'll say yes indeed. And I can also right click on this layer and delete it out. Yes indeed, we want to delete it out. Okay, so we will deal more with layers throughout this course, but that's a quick crash course on using the primary sculpting tool for your landscapes to quickly raise and lower some terrain. Hope you guys found it useful. We will see you all in the next video.